Now we begin to move into the final few units of AP World History. So this moves into Unit 7, talking about the world and global conflict. So to start off with this, we start beginning to look at Chapter 33, which is World War I, or known as the Great War, the world in upheaval. So what we want to get away from the information out of this chapter, out of this section, is to explain how internal and external factors contributed to changes in various states after 1900, so stuff that led to and after World War I, explaining the consequences and the causes of the war, and how governments used a variety of methods to conduct war, both on the actual battlefront and also at home. So for many people, this is going to be a reiteration of what you learned in U.S. history in relation to World War I, but obviously with a more global focus in mind. So, we got all this information here, a lot of symbols, a lot of visuals, and we want to understand, okay, what does a black hand, this gentleman right here, in these few images, and all of this have to do with it? So so really, it comes back down to trying to understand kind of how I always begin it if we're not playing, Franz Ferdinand's Take Me Out at the beginning of class, but understanding how do we get this guy here, member of the Black Hand terrorist organization of Bosnian Serbs, this guy is here, Gavrilo Princip, who kills these two people right here, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, okay, in the city of Sarajevo, which was at that point under the control and Empire of Austria-Hungary, okay, lead to this. Germany invades Belgium, England forced to fight. So that's what we want to try and understand within this first video, is kind of the background of how all this led, okay, all this even happened, okay, this guy killing these people leading to Germany invading Belgium. Okay, so if you already kind of know this, you're probably in a good spot, but again, it's just good to reiterate and kind of hit on this. So, the Archduke's assassination is the spark that begins World War I, but there's a lot of other background causes that lead to this becoming not only a conflict within Europe, but a global conflict known as the First World War. All right, so what we have to tie it into are what I usually use for, and many others do as well, the acronym MAIN: militarism, alliances, imperialism, we tie that with colonization, and nationalism. But we also have to ensure that we understand the fact that the Industrial Revolution plays a large role in the background as well. So, with militarism, it is the buildup of militaries, so both armies, navies at this point, not Air Force. Air Force doesn't really begin at this point. Airplanes are going to be used in World War I predominantly from reconnaissance and spying and getting information and details, and then later on gets more advanced as the war progresses, but again doesn't become anything until really World War II. The alliance system, and then these other big pieces here. So we want to really understand that, obviously we've talked about the fact that Europe has been expanding globally. That's kind of what the imperialism and colonization piece has been about, and that's in conjunction with colonization and the Industrial Revolution, and trying to not only get resources for new products, but also get new markets to sell goods and products, and also to, obviously get people to do the work for them. So that's been going on at the same time when we're beginning to see a lot of nationalism following, again, the American and French revolutions and, the age of Napoleon, where nationalism has begun to spread throughout Europe. So finally, in 1871, as we kind of briefly mentioned a while back, Germany finally becomes a unified country, predominantly led by the Prussians, which had been a very strong military region within, what we consider like the Germanic states. Italy, a little bit earlier, had also become finally a unified country for the first time since the fall of Rome. And so now you have them trying to catch up to the rest of these European powers, predominantly France and Great Britain, but also a little bit of Belgium, in terms of expanding for global empires. And we know that, Germany is somewhat successful. They're able to establish, colonies in Africa, as is Italy. But they also are now being to expand into Asia by having Pacific colonies and also having a sphere of influence in China. And that is pushing for, again, more competition between these other European powers. So trying to match the rivalry of the British Navy. Germany built its own massive navy to, again, kind of reiterate and protect its merchant fleets, but also its interests. But we also have down here in this part of the world, with the good old Ottoman Empire and Austro-Hungarian empires kind of being some of the more long-standing dynasties and empires that have been in existence for a while, dealing with nationalist issues. So we know that Greece had broken away from the Ottoman Empire in 1829, 1830. And then we have this country here, of Serbia that had broken off in the 1860s. And so Serbs are a part of the Slavic people, and Slavic people they use the Cyrillic language and the Cyrillic alphabet and have strong connections to the Eastern Orthodox Church, which has ties to the Czech people, the Slavic people, and what we know today to be Slovak people, and a lot of other people in what we consider to be what will be and will become and then become the former Yugoslavia, and also Russia. So Serbia had the backing of Russia in its independence movement and revolutions from the Ottoman Empire in the 1860s, but nationalism doesn't stop there. We have a group of people, in this area where Sarajevo would be known as Serbia, that will also want independence and actually kind of wants, and many of them want to do, is join with Serbia itself, and just get independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And they have the vocal backings of Russia. All right, and at the same time, this is obviously still building with the idea of expansion for markets, competition. So you have all these indirect background pieces that are setting up along stages that are leading to, conflicts between, other European countries, both militarily and also economically. Also for territorial pieces, we have France and Germany, kind of butting up heads in Africa. France, just as Germany became united, had lost territory to Germany in the 1870s and hasn't been forgiving of that. Everyone is sort of beginning to fear now expanded Russia over the last 100 years. Even while they're still going through reforms and industrialization, they are still a growing power, again, particularly on the Ottoman Empire side. So we're still trying to get that balance of power piece in as well. All right. So just kind of our big changes here. Here's Europe 1792 at the start of the French Revolution. Here's all these different independent Germanic and Belgian states. So you can kind of see that, and also our specific Italian states. 1812, at the height of Napoleon's power, we get a reorganization of territories within Central and Eastern Europe. And then here we are, 1815, another reorganization. But by 1861, here we see Germany again. You got Prussia extending a lot of it into the eastern and central parts of Germany. And then by 1871, this is what Germany has become, led by, again, a predominantly Prussian aristocracy, Prussian state, but unites the Germanic peoples, and then claims this territory very quickly in a very embarrassing war for the French, showing that they are not a power to be messed with. All right. So then here's the look at what we get in terms of, the map of Europe in 1914. There's Sarajevo, very close to Serbia. So then we can get to see our empire map again, or a different version of our empire map. So you kind of see the British in the red, the French in the blue, Germany here in the brown color. So you can kind of see, Germany has actually extended a little bit there. You don't see the spheres of influence map. But again, you got those global issues, and then you also have the Ottoman Empire over here. So within Austria-Hungary, here's our actual map of the different ethnic groups inside their territories. So you can kind of see the various multi-ethnic state that existed within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All right, so that's what kind of brings us to the forefront here. So we have Gavrilo Princip, member of the Black Hand terrorist organization, killing the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, again trying to build a either a Bosnian state or one that will unite with the Serbs, and they have the backing of the Serbs. So in the resulting parts of that, what we end up seeing is Austria-Hungary saying, hey, Serbia, you have to, meet all these different demands in terms of retribution for killing the heir of our throne. And Serbia is willing to concede most of them, but except giving up essentially their sovereignty. They don't want to say, we've been fighting to be independent. We're not going to lose that independence. And Serbia has the backing, again, of Russia being another Slavic country that wants kind of a pan-Slavic region and independence to strengthen its own ambitions and its own influence. So Russia is saying, hey, Austria-Hungary, you invade Serbia, we will go to war with you. Well, because of the increase of the balance of power, Germany and Austria-Hungary in the late part of the 1800s, 1870s, 1880s signed a treaty that says if they go to war, or if one goes to war, the other will aid the others, again, being Germanic peoples. So Germany says, you know what, if Russia is going to invade, we will defend our ally, Austria-Hungary. And Germany is actually also backing Austria-Hungary, saying, we'll go to war if you go to war with Serbia. We'll help you out. But, again, backing up on this, we have the fact that Russia has allied itself with France after France's defeat in the 1870s to Germany, again in that very quick war that embarrassed France. So the French, Russia, and Serbia have this alliance together and say, we are going to defend each other. This way, Germany and Austria-Hungary are less likely to attack, because that would mean that Germany has to fight what we consider to be a two-front war, right, which Germany knows that the Russians have more people, even if Germany has an industrial advantage, knows that that doesn't help out because France is also a very well-advanced industrialized state. Okay, now, England is neutral, at least initially, as is Belgium. So what happens here that we actually lead to, this invasion of Belgium? What does this have to do with it? Well, many of the countries had been planning a lot of military actions, again, preemptive actions, to help to offset and give more advantage in a war. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, Russia mobilizes its forces, then Germany does, then France does, but Germany does not want to fight that two-front war in order to, again, help out its Austro-Hungarian allies. So what they've been planning for about more than a decade was, if we go back to war with France, we know France is going to, buck up against the border here along the German-French border. Why wouldn't they? That's exactly what one would think. Belgium being neutral, Germany says, well, that won't be very heavily defended, so let's rush into Belgium, take the French by surprise, capture Paris, knock France out of the war, and then we can focus our attention on the much bigger threat that is Russia, because again, more people, more territory, all right, obviously bigger fronts, and Austria-Hungary is probably going to need our help. So Germany enacts what they call the Schlieffen Plan, which is that invasion of neutral Belgium to get to France. And when they invade Belgium, Great Britain, who said we're going to protect Belgium's neutrality, then declared war on Germany. So that's how we get to this global conflict, with Germany invading Belgium to get to France, knock them out of the war so they could focus their attention on Russia, with Russia being allied to Serbia. So hopefully if you can follow all those dots, hopefully that makes sense connected to the issues of nationalism, militarism, alliances, imperialism abroad, and also the Industrial Revolution. So that's what kickstarts this war that should have been a conflict between two countries, and now will begin to turn into a global conflict, because now Great Britain rushes its troops in to aid both Belgium and France, and obviously that plan for the Germans does not succeed. They come very, very close, actually, here on the Marne River to Paris, actually within about 20 to 40 miles. But again, they were actually slowed down by the Belgians, who they were not anticipating to put up much of a fight. It's not a long fight that they put up in terms of resisting the Germans, but a good enough one to slow them down that actually ends up slowing them down enough that the French are able to mount a pretty good counteroffensive to prevent Germany from, capturing Paris and knocking them out of the war. So that's how the war will end up beginning, and we will, in the next video, talk about this. What happens here. All right, so again, hopefully you're able to connect the dots from what happens with this leading to this. If not, definitely feel free to ask questions, because that's a lot of the background information that we've covered in those previous chapters, again, on our main eye, background to the war. So again, militarism, alliances, imperialism, colonialism, nationalism, and also the Industrial Revolution, and how those tie in to building up the tensions for this and leading to, the First World War.